Be about an hour, you said, right?
Yes.
Okay, sounds good.
If you get done before then, that's okay. People have 1 o'clock classes, if you know. And then, of course, in August we'll have you here on campus. So this will be just kind of like a little tidbit of what we can expect in August.
Very cool.
Okay, so go ahead and get started whenever you're ready.
All right. Okay. So you can see my slide now, right? Oh, I see you running over there. I think you're saying yes. Okay, cool. Right on. Okay, well, hey, everyone, thank you so much for taking the time to let me talk at you a little bit here. I really look forward to coming down to Eastern Arizona College in August for the kind of longer boot camp. I'm hoping to bring one or maybe two other members of our steering committee, our OER steering committee, with us, or with me, I guess, to kind of assist in it so that I'm not just talking to you for 4 hours. It's nice to kind of have a little break from that every once in a while. And I can be a little bit frenetic sometimes when I present. So if that's the case, I apologize in advance, but I'll try. I didn't have too much coffee yet today, so I think I should be okay. So what you see here on the screen is the first slide in the first workshop in a series of workshops that I designed last year for faculty development, professional development related to open educational resources here at the Maricopa Community Colleges. So just a little bit of background. The Maricopa County Community College District has been, I'm not just like tooting my own horn here because this happened way before me, but we have among our faculty some of the earliest adopters of OER, and our Maricopa Millions OER project, which started in 2013 formally, has actually become one of the more kind of prominent OER projects in the country. And we estimate that our students have saved upwards of $15 million since 2013 because faculty in our district have chosen to use low-cost, no-cost materials, sometimes even including OER. And the distinction between low cost, no cost, and OER is an important one, and that's something that we will be talking about a little bit later here. So the Maricopa Millions project has now been institutionalized, I guess, in a good way. And what I mean by that is when it first started, it was just a 5-year commitment by our provost at the time to fund the adoption, the adaptation of open resources across the district. The 5-year project, the funding for it, that ended in spring 2018. And what they decided to do at that point was, rather than just kind of form another ad hoc OER project, they decided to actually house the project in our Office of Academic Affairs and at the district level. And so now they have a full-time open educational resources faculty coordinator, and that person is me. I happen to be the first person to take on that assignment. So it is a full reassignment, and part of what I do, other than, I've designed or redesigned our grant projects, the way that we compensate faculty for developing and adopting resources. I have also gone and done some on-the-ground work trying to promote OER to faculty across the district, because we have 10 separate colleges in the Phoenix area that are part of the Maricopa district, and there are 1,400 approximately full-time faculty at those colleges. And so figuring out like who's actually using OER and who's not and who needs help is a lot of work. So it's been a great experience. We also had the opportunity to host the first Arizona Regional OER Conference, and Kristen came to that, and it was really a great experience for a lot of people who managed to make it, even though we had uncharacteristically crazy weather that day. Some folks from NAU and Yavapai College and Cochise College were not able to come because of the roads. But nonetheless, it was a pretty good success, and we look forward to doing it again next year. So OER is growing not just in Maricopa, but across the state and across the region, and of course everywhere else in the world. So that's that's probably way more information than you wanted to hear right at the outset of this thing, but I figure I should probably, I wanted to talk as much as possible so you could see this beautiful green line drawing that I made of open appropriateness, I guess. So anyway, I always like to kind of preface these workshops that I do these days with a couple of recommended readings. The first one here is a collection of essays that's relatively recent, 2017, and the author or the editors, one of them, the first one there is a man by the name of Rajiv Jangiani. He's the special advisor to the provost on open education at Kwantlen Polytechnic University in the Vancouver area in British Columbia. And he actually came to Maricopa for an OER Dialogue Day a couple of years ago. And his work with open pedagogy, some of these kind of more advanced concepts related to OER or OER enabled pedagogy are really interesting. But the reason why I have this book here is because it's a collection of essays that is a really good complement to the workshop series that I developed. This being the first of them, what we're going to do in the next hour here, the workshops are actually designed to be an hour and a half each. And what I'm going to do over the next 45 minutes, or I guess what 55 minutes I have left, is try to touch on a lot of the basic details from the first workshop, maybe the second and the third workshop as well. So we're going to cover kind of an overview of open licensing, or what OER is, what open means. And then after that, we'll talk a little bit about Creative Commons licensing and perhaps even a little bit about copyright. But I would actually prefer to leave the real complicated copyright discussions for the boot camp in August, because that can, I don't know if any of you have ever discussed intellectual property and copyright and fair use with anybody or other educators, but that can very quickly derail any other conversation that might be going on, if not put people to sleep. So we'll focus on that when we have the need to do it. But some of the basics we'll talk about today. So anyway, because the workshop series touches on all these aspects of open educational resources, I like to recommend this book because, like any good open educational resource, right, it is itself openly licensed. So you can go online and download the PDF for free if you want. It's a set of essays by some prominent voices in open education, addressing it from a variety of perspectives. You can also buy a hard copy if you want. I don't make any money off of it. I just have. And then this right here, the second one here is actually an article. It's not too long. It was published last year by a few, again, pretty prominent people in OER. Lisa Petrides is actually the CEO of the International Society for Knowledge Management and Education, or ISKME, and that's the organization that that operates OER Commons, which is one of the largest and oldest kind of OER repositories out there, or databases. And so what this article does is it kind of made a little bit of a splash in the open education community last year. People have had varying responses to it, but I kind of like it because what it does is it kind of brings up a number of issues that have emerged in open education as open educational resources have begun to kind of challenge the traditional book industry, textbook publishing industry in a way, and change the way that we are having our students interact with knowledge. And so that's something I'll talk about a little bit more towards the end of this workshop. So or this or I don't know, somewhere in the middle of the thing today. So anyway, moving on. So just to kind of get a sense of it, I know a lot of times when people think about, yes?
We're not seeing your slides advance.
Oh, well, that's not, you're still stuck on this thing? Oh, you can't see it. Let's see, hold on a sec. Let's do this. Is that working now?
You're advancing, thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. But you could hear me, right? So, okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Okay, here are the recommended readings. So that way, and by the way, I emailed Kristen links. These Google slides are all publicly available. So I emailed all the links to all the slides in all 7 workshops to Kristen, so she can forward that to you. And then there is also an online workshop that I created back in 2013. So it's kind of old. It's still pretty accurate and stuff like that, but it might need to be dusted off a little bit, but it's a good resource nonetheless. And it's a faculty workshop about OER, and there's a lot of people actually have used that as a resource. So the way to find that is there too. It was built in Maricopa's Canvas, but it's actually, you can take it for free on Canvas Network as a self-paced course, or you can even find it in Canvas Commons if you happen to use Canvas as your LMS. I don't remember off the top of my head if you guys use Canvas or not, but you can still find it and use it. So anyway, moving on. So what is open? A lot of times when people think about open educational resources, they think, and with relative accuracy, I think, they think free, right? It's free to the students. And that's great because you save students money and you kind of take down that, what arguably unnecessary barrier to someone's education. But when I talk about OER, I like to reference Catherine Casserly's list of the central values of open education. She articulated these at the Open Education Conference in Anaheim back in 2017. And I just remember it being really meaningful to me, because the question is not just, are we saving our students money when we're talking about open education, but there's a larger ecosystem there. And the saving students money is a really super important part, and has been or was the focus of OER or the OER open community for a good period of time. But ultimately, where the open movement comes from and what it has the potential to do in terms of pedagogy goes far beyond just saving students money, which, like I said, is in and of itself is a good thing. But so freedom, you can read the freedom, transparency, equity, access, inclusion, and collaboration. We will see, I think, pretty clearly how a number of these values are illustrated or seen at work in some of the practices, the open educational practices that we'll be talking about here. So just a little bit of background, the concept of open content licensing and openness, I guess, in the sense of sharing materials and sharing intellectual property rather than adhering to restrictive or what some people perceive to be overly restrictive copyright laws, comes out of a larger movement called the free culture movement. So the free culture movement, I'm sure that you are all familiar with the concept of open source software, for example. Open educational resources are in some very basic ways like the educational analog of open source software. In fact, in some ways, it's kind of a misnomer to call something an open educational resource, because all you're doing is using something that happens to be openly licensed. So an open educational resource is just like any bit of intellectual property that happens to be openly licensed that you might use for an educational purpose. That would be what makes something an open educational resource other than just an open resource or an open content. So partly this goes back to the founding of the Creative Commons. So Creative Commons is a nonprofit organization that was founded back in 2001, I believe. And one of its co-founders, Lawrence Lessig, was has actually written extensively on it. He's a Harvard professor, law professor, and he was a huge proponent of the free culture movement, which was arguing that creativity actually is sparked when people are able to freely remix each other's work. And so there's a whole discussion and an entire debate, and I hope that we'll have some of that debate if we have time at the boot camp in August to get into some of these details, because this gets philosophical really quickly and it gets political really quickly. And we don't necessarily have to go into all those detail if we just want to focus on the core thing, which is like, how do we get our students that immediate and permanent access to quality learning materials? And how is it that that kind of access can not only impact their success in school and in life, but also empowers them to contribute to global knowledge instead of just consuming it. So, but I did want to give you a little bit of the history here. And I'm not going to go through every single slide in this, by the way, because like I said, I have to skip some stuff. So starting with that. So I'm actually going to, right here, these are actually in the Canvas workshop that I recommended that you check out. Let me see if I actually have Canvas. I'm going to have to switch my screen here. Just one second. I forgot to log in. Okay. So let's see, you can see, okay, you can see my canvas now, I'm assuming. So this is the faculty workshop that I have, that I've given you kind of instructions on how to find it. And I just want to show a couple of pages to you right now, one of which is, let's see if we can get in here. So first of all, this is, you can read the screen, but I'll read it to you actually. But one of the definitions, the most common definition that I have seen people use is the definition from the Hewlett Foundation for OER. So an OER is OER are teaching, learning, and research resources that reside in the public domain or have been released under an intellectual property license that permits their free use and repurposing by others. Note that it does not say open educational resources are free digital resources. That's not what OER is. Free digital resources or free resources or textbooks that you can check out from the library, those are great ways to save students money potentially. Arguably, buying a bunch of textbooks, especially if they're going to be updated frequently, is not a good way to save students money because it's not really very sustainable. But there are other ways to save students money on textbook materials and course learning materials. OER are specifically these kinds of materials that are used for teaching and learning that are released under this kind of an open sharing license. That is what makes something an OER. So this allows their free use and repurposing by others. And so this is where we get into some really interesting definitional stuff. I, for the longest time, in fact, as of like a year ago, was still kind of under the impression that an open educational resource was anything that I would use for education that has a Creative Commons license or that is in the public domain. But as we'll see, not all of these Creative Commons licenses permit changing the work. Some Creative Commons licenses say you can redistribute the content, but you can't change it in any way. And by certain definitions of OER, that makes it not OER because you don't have the opportunity to adapt the material or to cut parts of it out and use it, you know, in a way that's customized for your instance. And that's one of the big promises of OER, is that faculty are able to really customize it for their location, customize it for their, you know, unique group of students. Now, I will say that there is another kind of this is kind of like an even more fundamentally open description of what OER can be, what's highlighted here. This comes from a 2007 UNESCO report. And this, among the several characteristics of ideal OER, it's not just that it is, you know, permitting adaptation and reuse, but it should be published in a format that everyone can open so that you're not relying on proprietary software. It should be easily reusable, so that way, that means like not a 700-page PDF, you know, it should be broken up into a bunch of smaller chunks and ideally a type of chunk that you can remix. OER should be easy to find, and that's not always the case, although we're getting better. There are some pretty cool meta finders I hope to be able to share with you a little bit later today. And they should be efficient for teaching and learning. And this is one of those big, there is the sense that a lot of people have, one of the big fears, I guess, or I guess faculty who are reluctant to adopt OER sometimes are afraid that the materials are not as high quality as the publisher textbooks. And it's absolutely true that open educational resources vary in quality, because an open educational resource can be written by anyone and published by anyone. And, you know, doesn't necessarily mean that, or I guess that means that it hasn't gone through necessarily gone through a peer review process, although there are some OER who have, or that have gone through extensive peer review, such as open educational resources published by OpenStax, which is a organization out of Rice University that is, it's a nonprofit, but they're part of Rice University, and they have published a set of really high quality open textbooks that are totally free online, and you can buy, if your students want, you know, your students can buy hardcover copies, which are available at like basically at cost. I mean, they're maybe a couple bucks up from the cost to print the thing out, and that's part of the sustainability model that OpenStax has for their organization. But that's an example of really high quality OER. So there are ways that you can probably distinguish between what's OER and what's not. In fact, this page here kind of goes through it. And actually, you know what? This is just a bunch of text and it's kind of ugly. So let me jump back over to my sharing screen. So let's see if make sure that this is on there. Okay, I think you can see it. All right, so this is prettier to look at, right? Okay, so this is a nice little graphic that I found last year, and it's in the public domain, and it's by Julia Forsyth. So whoever you are, Julia Forsyth out there in the world, thank you for creating this thing, because it's a great tool. I've used it a lot. This is my little attribution down here, required to use. It's actually not required because it's public domain, but I did it anyway. See, that's where I went off on a tangent. I apologize. So anyway, so this is a nice little visual to kind of give you a sense of what we're talking about when we say OER. They are resources. It could be anything. It could be anything from like an individual image to an individual chapter in a book, or a quiz, or a PowerPoint, or an entire course, or an entire textbook, or whatever. I mean, it literally could be like any kind of intellectual property that someone might use for an educational purpose, and shared under the public domain. Public domain means that no one owns the copyright, or the open license. And then they have here the Creative Commons attribution. That's the CC BY. I'll talk about that very briefly in a moment here. So this license is one of the more common and the most open of the Creative Commons licenses. And so we'll talk about what that means exactly. So the concept of education being an act of sharing, something I think is really was really popularized by Lumen Learning, which is a for-profit company, but founded by some really prominent OER advocates who have done a good, arguably good job of like lowering, offering students low-cost options. And I say they're a for-profit company, but you can go onto their website and like literally access their entire course catalog. They make money by offering OER enhancement services, so like homework systems and things like that that go with the homework, or that go with the OER. But if you want to go online to their website and download their content, it's within your rights to do so, because of the fact that it's all openly licensed. In fact, they didn't build it all. They are remixing OpenStacks and remixing content that they got from other places too. So anyway, education is sharing is like their motto, but it's a nice way to think about it. And when you're talking about sharing, we're talking about these 5 R's of OER right here. So this is what I love about it. So free means that you don't have to pay for it. There's a lot of things that are free, but that kind of suck, right? And I don't mean in terms of quality, but just like think about like, I don't know, sometimes like a streaming service. Let's say there's like a streaming service, like music streaming service, that you don't own any of the material. You get to listen to music for free, but you don't really even have control over what music plays, whether that's like on the radio or whether it's like Pandora or whatever, right? There are these kinds of streaming services that are free, but are not, you can't control it, you can't own it or anything like that. And it's arguably not, the best way to interact with intellectual property. It's kind of nice to have a little bit of control over the thing that you want to use, right? So OER permit you to reuse the material, like forever, and to keep it, to retain the material. This is increasingly important because in this culture of digital information sharing and digital consumption of media, so much of what we do and what students are increasingly having to pay for is access. They pay for a digital access to material that expires at some point. And there are all kinds of reasons, I'm sure you can imagine, why it would be nice to be able to keep your, like if they're paying for a digital access code, they can't even sell that back at the end of the semester. At least if they buy a physical textbook, they might be able to sell it back. But then not only that, but with the textbook, they have the option to keep it for later. So digital access codes are actually arguably worse than textbooks when it comes to access and cost. And yet that is increasingly what you find publishers doing. So the ability to actually retain the material is vital for students. And it's also really great for us too, because then we're not relying on links that inevitably break. I don't know if you like me, but sometimes if I have a course that I've taught 15, 20 times, well, I don't know. That's over let's say several years, right? I've taught the same course several years. I'll just roll the same content over the next semester and go in, change the dates and stuff like that, and I expect it all to work. But if I have any links in there, who knows? One day that one of those links is going to break, and then it's a nightmare. But that's not a problem if you're not linking out to something. If you actually have the right to redistribute and retain the material yourself, then you don't actually have to worry about that because you own it. You own a copy of it, and you can give it to others. You can redistribute that copy to other people without having to go get explicit permission every single time because there's a Creative Commons license already on that thing. So then you also have the ability to remix and revise. Remix refers to mixing, just like a DJ, two different things together, right? So, or more things. So if you're, wiki, kind of remixing your materials, you find two different articles that are both openly licensed and the licenses match, and you like part of one and part of the other, and you want to put them together so that your students you think are going to have a better experience, you're totally free to do that if you do it according to the license. Or if you just simply want to revise the material to improve it or to make it more localized, like I suggested, you have that opportunity as well. There are also studies here that suggest, that's this last little bit of this graphic, there are also studies that suggest that, well, obviously access and affordability are kind of given, but there are studies that show that students using open textbooks typically perform the same, if not better, on certain metrics related to student success. So there's still a lot of discussion and debate out there about how well open educational resources can impact student skills mastery, outcome-based learning and that kind of thing. So that's a little, there's a lot of research yet to be done in this, but there is a growing body of research out there about the efficacy and the perception of open educational resources. I'm skipping a couple of slides here because, like I said, we want to move on, and it's just a good segue because so like I was saying, some of the, these are some of the major takeaways from a literature review that is maintained by the Open Education Group. So if you Google Open Education Group, and then I think literature review or something like that, then it will come up and you'll see that they have a page. Dr. John Hilton at Brigham Young University actually is the one who kind of maintains it. And they basically have like a running literature review of all of these different research studies that have been published in scholarly journals about open educational resources. And so these are some of the major takeaways. And you can tell by the screen here that I'm not into hard data. I am an English literature major. And so you'll have to you can go read the studies if you want to look at the numbers. So this does say that one thing is, as you can probably already talk about, number one. Number two, teachers and students alike tend to regard open educational resources highly. That's probably not that big of a surprise to you if you think about all the things that I've been talking about, not worrying about links breaking from the faculty perspective, owning the material, the ability to revise it. Or students like it because it saves them money, but a lot of students also like it too because they don't have to like always log in. They can download it, they can print it out. They have a lot of flexibility with it. A lot of times OER is just like faculty are able to really blend it into the learning management system that they're using because of the licensing. It's really easy to be able to do that and not be violating the law. So yeah, the perception is really high. We also found at Tidewater College, I think is in Virginia, that Z-degree students, they're zero. Now this is not an OER, strictly OER degree. This is a zero course materials cost degree. But students using the Z degree ended up actually taking more classes on average in terms of like at a time. And so the argument was, or the, I guess extrapolating or the way that they interpreted that, I guess you could say, is they felt like, well, okay, they have more money on hand because they don't have to pay $300 a semester for their textbooks. And if you're talking about community college, right, $300 goes a long way towards taking one extra class. And so that translates into faster completion, right? Degree completion too. So they don't take as long to complete. And then also that throughput, right? So, looking at not just like whether or not students are succeeding in the course, but like how many students are actually staying in a course through the drop add period, how many students are withdrawing, when, those kinds of things. So there's some interesting research out there about that stuff. Now, when we talk about OER, again, I said about the licensing, but there's a lot of different shapes and sizes, I guess. One of the ways that we often see OER addressed manifest, I guess, is in the form of open textbooks, which are increasingly, well, I'm reluctant to say much about that. Okay, let me actually take a step back here. Okay, so open textbooks are replacing traditional textbooks. And there is this perception in the open education community that what's problematic about a textbook is going to be problematic about an open textbook too, because textbooks are static. Textbooks are, part of the assumption about a textbook is that like it contains the knowledge and that the student is just receiving the knowledge or consuming it. And that consumption model, whether you're talking about like the Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. This is what Rajiv Jhangiani, who I mentioned earlier, he brought this up as an example, but talking about the banking model of education. There's a lot of criticism about that. And so the concept of a textbook being the static container of the knowledge and the student being the uninformed container of the knowledge goes back, there's a lot of precedent for that and criticism of that. So the idea is that open textbooks are great because they save students money, but the license really permits you to do so much more. Now, we won't probably have time in the next 30 minutes or so to get into great detail on the concept of open pedagogy. You can see I'm skipping here a little bit, but I'll get back to the other two. But open pedagogy is the sense that rather than having students just simply read the textbook, you involve students in activities that basically have them writing the textbook, or not even just get rid of the word textbook. You have students doing assignments that demonstrate their skills mastery relevant to a certain topic, while at the same time generating content that actually adds value to global knowledge outside of the classroom. And that's permitted only when what you're doing is licensed in such a way that it's not going to be violating intellectual property. I mean, if you having your students make study tools for themselves is not a new concept, but if they make a study tool for themselves using excerpts from a proprietary textbook or stuff they find online or whatever, that's all copyrighted material that is not. They're permitted to remix it on their own as long as they don't publish it, right? I mean, they're students. If they submit it to you, then they can defend themselves with student educational fair use and say like, oh well, this isn't having any impact at all on the publication, blah blah blah. But they can't share it with anyone. They can't go publish it online, because if they publish it online, that's no longer in the academic setting. The academic fair use is probably not going to apply in that case, and they could be violating and they're likely violating the law. They could put it on their YouTube channel and they would get a copyright strike, right? Somebody would probably tell them to take it down. So open licensing actually, however, permits all of that. There's also this word MOOC, which I think is a really unfortunate acronym, but nonetheless, massive open online course. And so that's kind of like what that Canvas workshop that I created is. Like, anyone can log in, anyone can take the course. You don't have to be in an institution. The materials are all free. That's basically what a massive open online course is. This was like a big fad a while back, and people started studying it. They were like, this is going to transform education. And then you'd have 15,000 students sign up for a MOOC, and then only 5 of them would actually finish it. And then only one of those 5 would pay the money to actually receive the official certificate, because that's a lot of times how these institutions would operate it. I think that MIT and maybe Berkeley, there were some other really, really prominent institutions who offered these kinds of MOOCs. And you would, like I said, I mean, you'd have like 15,000 students enroll. 2,000 students actually start the course. I'm kind of making these numbers up a little bit, but just to give you a sense of the magnitude, I'd have to go back and look at, but like literally a fraction of the ones who enrolled would actually start it. And only a tiny fraction of the amount that started it would finish it. And only a small amount of those would pass it. And then only a very, very small amount of those would actually receive educational credit for it. So it has kind of been perceived in some ways as a giant flop until we figure out how to do it better. But nonetheless, it is one of the ways in which you see open educational resources being used. And then I already talked about the Z degree. The idea is, and there's a lot of different iterations of this. There's the Z degree, zero cost, zero textbook cost, ZTZ. This is like in California has a lot of these. An OER degree would be a degree where students can, basically go through their entire degree pathway without ever having to, without using anything but OER or primarily OER. Z-Cred, if you're familiar with what a Canadian would say the proper way to pronounce the final letter in the alphabet. This is what they call it up in British Columbia. And so anyway, so there's a lot of different words that are used for that as well. So I think what I want to do at this point is actually just transition to my other set of slides. And maybe before I do that, I can take, what do you think? Does anybody have any questions that I can respond to? I've just been blabbing here this whole time.
Matthew, we don't have any questions at this time.
Okay. Well, let me know if you're sick of hearing my voice. Okay, so because I'll stop. Okay, so anyway, moving on then. So this next one here, this is I skipped the workshop, like I said, totally skipping the slides on copyright and licensing, or specifically copyright and fair use, because I'm not an expert on copyright and fair use. I'm not really an expert on Creative Commons licensing either. I just happen to know a lot more than somebody who's just learning it for the first time. This set of slides, along with the copyright slides, were actually developed by Annalee Perry. That's her name. She is the scholarly communication librarian at Arizona State University. And so whenever I do these workshops in the Valley here, she usually helps out and facilitates the second and the third one, because she really is an expert on copyright, fair use, and Creative Commons licensing. So I'm using her slides, and I didn't have to get her permission. Do you know why? Because it's openly licensed. So anyway, so sorry, let me skip a few of them. These are some of the slides are repeated because I offer these as like one-offs too. People can actually just attend one if they want. So some pretty cool slides here, designed a little bit differently than mine. But so we kind of already talked about the reason why people argue you need a Creative Commons license, right? There's copyright is arguably there to protect it's there to protect your intellectual property, so that you know that any time or resource investment that you put into creating something is not going to go to waste, because then someone else can just take it and profit off of it, right? So there's the argument that copyright has a reason to exist. It's in the Constitution. It's the Berne Convention, which was late 19th century treaty. All the countries signatory on that agreed that that copyright was automatic. So you don't actually even have to go register something. You can. There is a copyright office if you want to be sure that it's on file, that something is yours. But as soon as you write something down on a piece of paper, as long as it's your original intellectual property, or a derivative that is a considerable transformation, then you own the rights to that thing, and you own the right to redistribute it and to make money off of it, and to change it and all that. Somebody else can't just come do it, because you can sue them. But why do we need Creative Commons licenses? Well, as I kind of mentioned in the last set of slides, there is the perception that copyright can be overly restrictive. If you think about remixing music, right? There are some cases where maybe you feel like one artist has just ripped another artist off. Very famous example, I'm kind of dating myself here, but would be back in I think late 80s or early 90s, when Vanilla Ice, Ice Ice Baby came out. And it had that kind of riff at the beginning of it that was virtually the same thing as Queen and David Bowie's Under Pressure. And, he was arguing that it was different, and then it was just kind of ridiculous. So it's obviously just a ripoff. But there are other cases where in music, you can see some really amazing things happen when artists are able to remix music. Look at the birth of hip hop, basically, right? It's taking, music that was actually disco or maybe soul music, and playing it at different speeds and mixing it together and doing all kinds of things with it that are technically not really legal, right? And so the creativity is made we want to facilitate the creativity, the argument goes. And so Creative Commons tries to make that happen. And what they've done is they've developed a set of licenses over the years. The current licenses that they offer, and when I say offer, they're free to use. Anybody can use these licenses. They're legal tools. They don't replace copyright. They actually work alongside or on top of copyright to make it really easy for individual authors of content to basically give a blanket permission to the world to use the work in a certain way. Now, just to be super clear, you don't have to have a Creative Commons license on your material in order for other people to use it. You can just write a note to that person that says, I permit you to use this material in your class. If you get an email from a publisher that says yeah, feel free to use that in your slides, that's good. The thing about having the Creative Commons license is that that permission doesn't have to be explicitly made 7 billion times. It's done once, and then everyone in the world forever gets to use the material in that way. So I know, and I keep referring to this guy, Rajiv Jhangiani. I've met him several times. He's like an awesome guy, and he's just brilliant. So I like to use some of his descriptions. He likes to refer to these as hieroglyphics. And so it is a little bit opaque maybe at first. You look at it and you're like, okay, what does all this stuff mean? You know, it's kind of a whole language of its own. It's really not too complicated once you really get some of the specific restrictions that these things are, or what this means actually, right? So let's just move to the first one. This is the first one. It's called the Creative Commons Attribution license. And so CC BY stands for attribution, as in this work is by Matthew Bloom, or this work is by, you know, the Scottsdale Community College Math Department. So the Creative Commons Attribution license is the most open of the Creative Commons licenses, or at least the traditional ones. They have, not to complicate things in the middle of a sentence, but they have actually released a public domain tool. So you can actually, if you want, you can just put your work into the public domain and basically waive all your rights to it. But see, that's the thing. Creative Commons is kind of cool because you're not actually waiving your rights to the material. You're just not all rights reserving it, right? What you're doing is you're saying some rights reserved. So when you see the CC BY license on a work, you are free to make copies and to redistribute the work in any way you want. You can remix the work, you can transform it, build upon the material, do whatever you want, share and adapt. You can even sell it. So that's the thing, is that a lot of people, you know, if you don't care about somebody else maybe taking something that you wrote and putting it in a compilation or a collective work of some sort, and then publishing that and maybe making money off of it, then this would be fine, right? You do have the option. There are other Creative Commons licenses that do have non-commercial clauses, and we'll talk about that in a second. I want to point out, though, that the Creative Commons licenses, you'll note down here, do say that you are not allowed to add additional restrictions. So you're not allowed to apply legal terms or technological measures that legally restrict others from doing anything the license permits. So if this says right here that you are free to redistribute the material in any medium or format, you can't then say, as apparently somebody did, and then they got called out, apparently somebody released a material under CC BY, but then said, however, no one's allowed to use this in a course wherein someone had to pay tuition, to enter the course. Well, you can't do that. You can't say that it's on the CC BY license and then say, however, except in this case, right? That's not allowed. This is a legal tool that has actually been, there's some precedent in the courts already on these things because they've been around for 18 years, and you can't just do whatever you want. So anyway, non-commercial, right? So this is one a lot of educators like, because a lot of times, educators I talk to are like, well, I really like the idea of sharing these materials, but I don't want a publisher to take it and and profit off of it. And I totally understand that, and I'm not going to judge you for it. So the non-commercial license, just to be really clear, when you release work under it, well, let's first talk about using it. If you find work that's attribution non-commercial or any kind of non-commercial clause, that doesn't mean that no money can be anywhere near the thing, right? So some people think that that means that, for example, if a student pays tuition, that then the school can't use the material. That's actually not the case. It's more like there can't be like a transaction involved for the material. So it's a totally different story to say, oh, the student paid tuition. There is an argument, though, that for-profit institutions can't use non-commercial stuff because they're actually selling the education in a way that a public institution or a private nonprofit institution is not. And so there's some debate about that, I think. But the main thing to get from this is you can use this as long as you don't sell it. And then if you release your own work with a non-commercial restriction, then that means that you're saying to others they can't sell your work, but you're not saying you can't sell your work. So if you release your work with a attribution non-commercial license, and then later on somebody says, hey, I'll pay you, $100 if you let me sell this or whatever, I don't know. You can engage in those kinds of contracts, right? Individual contracts. You're just not, by putting this non-commercial license, you're just not allowing everyone in the world to sell it. So then another one of the little restrictions that you see, the little thing here is, or clauses or whatever you want to call them, is SA. So if you see SA, that means share alike. Share alike is not really a complicated concept, but it does sometimes, yes, yeah, so it requires a little bit of explanation. So the idea is, open educational resources allow you to change material, right? So you can create derivative works with OER. And so if you do create a derivative work and it is, not just like a superficial thing, like you didn't just like change the font of something, or you didn't just change 2 words in a, in a book. If you're actually significantly revising the content of a work that's openly licensed, you can change the license. Like if someone has a work that is attribution non-commercial, and then you take it and you significantly edit the thing so that, or adapt it so that it is considerably different, right? And to the extent that the person, that it's clearly a new thing, right? Even if it is a derivative of something else, right? If you do that and you want to sell your derivative, you can, because you have changed it, and then you can actually take that non-commercial license off of there. What you can't do though, you can't do that if it has a share alike clause. So the share alike clause requires that any derivative work be licensed the same way. So if I go back a couple slides, you'll see that one of them is a non-commercial share alike. This means that if somebody uses the material and changes it, makes a derivative out of it, they still can't sell it because it has a share alike license. Wikipedia is probably the most famous thing in the world that is attribution share alike. All the text in Wikipedia is licensed that way. The last one here, last Creative Commons license, or the last of the clauses that we'll talk about real quickly, is this no derivatives. So the no derivatives clause, people argue, I mean, by definition, this is not an OER, but it's still kind of nice to be able to use stuff that's no derivatives. You just can't change it. So like, for example, an example of something that, even though it's not by definition OER, is still really great for you to use in your classes potentially, and freely available for you to use under this license, is the TED Talks. So actually TED Talks is not available under this specific one. Oops, my bad. TED Talks is under, I believe, the non-commercial no derivatives. So what that means is you can actually download a TED Talks video and then upload it to your own, because if you go to the TED Talks website, I'm assuming everybody knows what TED Talks is, but they're like 18-minute talks where somebody, author or researcher or somebody, kind of has this big idea that they share, and they can be inspiring and interesting and thought-provoking and really great for discussions in any number of different disciplines. You can go to the TED Talks website and download the video. You can download the video, and then you can upload that video. You can use it in your Canvas site or your LMS, although taking up a whole bunch of space on the LMS with videos is probably not ideal, but you can just upload it to your own YouTube channel. You can create a YouTube channel for your course, a personal YouTube channel, or one that your institution is paying for. And then what you can do is you can just like upload the YouTube videos or the TED Talk videos that you want your students to watch. Well, you're permitted to do that because you're allowed to redistribute and keep that material as long as, in that case, you don't sell it and you don't change it. Now, what sucks about that is that if you don't want your students to watch 18 minutes, you can't excerpt like 2 minutes out of it and just show them the 2 minutes. You'd have to tell them, okay, fast forward to, minute 14 or whatever. But that's not that big a deal. So while it's not by definition, or at least by the stricter definition, an open educational resource, you can see it's still really potentially helpful because you still have the ability to retain and redistribute. Okay, so, oh, there we go. That was the next slide anyway. So then there's public domain. That's, again, I didn't make these slides. I love the fact that she put this thing on here. I guess it's because it's in the public domain, and it just demonstrates how creative people can be. Public domain just means that no one owns the copyright. And so the public domain actually it expands every year. That actually didn't happen for like 20 years because I think it was called the Sonny Bono Act, was passed in the 90s. And what that did was that added for like 20 years, it basically stalled works from being released into the public domain. And so just to go back again, this is where you know, a real expert on copyright would be better off talking about this. But for the longest time, since the 90s, anything published before 1922, pretty much, was in the public domain. I mean, you could do whatever you want. Like Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, brilliant novel, right? Well, did you know about Pride and Prejudice and Zombies? That novel was written by somebody else, but what they did was they actually took Jane Austen's novel and then it's like a mashup novel. And then they wrote some chapters about zombies and they mashed it all together. And so you had, as a result, Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. And that person made a whole bunch of money, and they made a movie out of it and everything, right? So for the longest time, it was anything before 1922. Literally just this year, the act of Congress that I just referenced, and I think I got the name right, expired, and they didn't renew it. And that means that as of this year, every year from now on, or at least in the near future, more and more works will be released in the public domain. So as of now, it's everything before 1923. And next year, it's going to be everything before 1924, and so on and so on and so on. Disney's kind of worried, and there's probably going to be a big fight because Steamboat Willie is going to be in the public domain pretty soon. And that might be a discussion. I think the argument that they'll probably, not a lawyer, but the argument they may make is that Mickey Mouse is not a work of intellectual property that's under copyright, but that it is a work of intellectual property that is a trademark. And that's a whole different section of intellectual property laws in the United States. So, but again, I'm not a lawyer. Don't talk to me about that. All right. So just the last thing I want to talk about is how to remix material real quickly. You can see that these are, there's a couple images here. We're going to talk about the TV dinner model of using openly licensed content, and then we'll talk about the smoothie model of openly licensed content. And then, because I think you guys are going to have lunch right after this, hopefully it will be appetizing, although I have to say this is not an attractive looking meal, but nonetheless. The TV dinner analogy for open content licensing and use, right, is that you have separate works, and those works are clearly distinguished from each other, right? There's a little wall separating the peas from whatever that thing is in the middle there. So what you have then is you have individual works that are all, you know, they all have their own license, and they're just assembled together. So this is the kind of thing that you would do like in a content page in your learning management system. If you were to embed a YouTube video that has one license, and then you've got a chunk of text that has another license, and then you've got an image and there's a caption that says its license, those are all separate, like clearly distinguishable things. And so that way you can kind of get away with quite a bit. I mean, you can have one of those things on that content page, or let's say a slideshow, right? These slides that I have are very much like that, right? There's this thing right here in the public domain. This one you can see down here is CC BY. It's because this image is separate, clearly separate from this image. And so it's like the TV dinner analogy. And one of them could be a no derivatives because I haven't changed the image, whereas the other one might just be CC BY, and so on and so on. So this is an easy way to think like, hey, well, I'm not really remixing it so much. I'm just arranging open resources in proximity with each other. And as long as it's really clear to your reader or whoever's going to consume the collective work that you create, you know, as long as your attributions are clear, then you know, you're going to be fine. However, there are situations when you combine works in such a way that they are no longer distinguishable from each other. This is where you make something different, right? This is the smoothie. You, like, once you put all the stuff in a smoothie and you blend it together, it's like you can't clearly tell where the banana ends and where the strawberry begins. And so that's why if you're making a smoothie and you got some attribution non-commercial bananas and you got public domain strawberries and your attribution pineapple, and then over here you've got your attribution non-commercial share-alike oranges. Well, when you mix all that stuff together, this license is the dominant license. Like, orange is going to be all throughout this thing. You're not going to be able to say, once you mix this stuff together, that it's in the public domain, because there's oranges in there, and those oranges are under this more restrictive license. So a good rule of thumb is if you're blending stuff together in the smoothie fashion, then you want to the good rule of thumb is that the most restrictive license takes over for the entire thing. So I'm running out of time. I'm not going to show you. Don't even look at that. Okay. Let's see. A couple places you can go. Google Advanced Search to find OER. Go down to Google Advanced Search. Click on the little drop-down menu for usage rights. And in fact, if you're in Google Images, you can do this. You don't even have to go to Advanced Search. I think it's under Tools, and you can select usage rights. In fact, it might just be on the bar now. But you can see it's not worded exactly like Creative Commons, but it's pretty close, and actually that's what's going to come up. Of course, you want to double check everything, but you can find all kinds of openly licensed content using Google's amazing algorithms. No, I don't make any money from them either. There's also a couple other places that you can go to get access to materials that might otherwise be behind a paywall. So, you know, usually our students do have pretty good access to research because your institution pays for that. The materials that you might use or find using these tools, unpaywall.org and open access button, those might not be open licensed materials, but this is a way to get your students access to content that they otherwise might not have access to. There's also a couple of meta finders out there, and I think, yeah, good, okay. There's George Mason University has their OER meta finder that you can use. It basically, I mean, there's a ton of places online where you can find OER, but this actually just aggregates the search from all those and then delivers some awesome stuff to you. So there's that one, and then there's a really new one out of SUNY Geneseo called Oasis. And this is a really great meta finder too. You go here and you look for a textbook, and it's going to yield results from OpenStax and from SUNY OER Services and from Lumen Learning and from the Open Textbook Network and from BC Campus and from you know, all these different, you know, Monterey Institute, all these other places where OER is being developed across the country. So I think at that point, I think there's Internet Archive also. There's tons of stuff. Go look through these slides. It's great. The CC search too. In fact, the CC search beta is pretty awesome. If you go to search.creativecommons.org, there's actually a link to their new image search, and that's really cool because it actually automatically creates the attribution for you. Now, I hate to do this because we're out of time. I hate to not continue talking about attribution, but we are out of time. So I will say this, that, let me get my other slides open. So when it comes to attribution, you want to make sure that the open resource that you are working with is clearly labeled. So that's what the attribution means, right? So you'll see that here, this image right down at the bottom contains an attribution. The attribution says the title, the author, the source, and the license. All that stuff's required. And so for more information on that, you can actually just go to the Creative Commons website. They have a page on best practices for attribution. You can also look at my Canvas workshop, or you can come to the OER boot camp at Eastern Arizona College, which I believe is going to be in August. And I probably should know the exact date, but I don't have it up right now. Anyway, I think I'm done for now. I hope that didn't just, like, you know, scare everybody.
Yeah, so it was very good, Matthew. Thank you. And
all right.
We didn't have any questions here, so thank you again, and I will share the information that you emailed to me with everyone, and then we'll connect about August later this week.
Okay.
All right.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks.